Spirited driving is what the STi was made for, and I can never get enough taking it out on the winding back roads. To make those drives more enjoyable, I've got a set of Swift Spec-R lowering springs sent over from the guys at Import Image Racing. We're going to be diving into what other options there are for lowering springs, how to install these ones, what geometry changes they make to the car like the camber, and most importantly, how do they feel on the road. When it comes to the STi, there's basically two main brands for lowering springs. You have the RCE Yellows or these Swift Spec-Rs. Now you do have White Line and Eibach, which also make lowering springs, but general consensus is these two are the main two you can get that are going to perform the best on the car. And in terms of price, the RC Yellows are a little bit more expensive at $379. Now the Swifts are cheaper at $350-ish. Now it's about a $30 difference, but that's actually not why I chose these in the first place. There are a couple other reasons why I went with these Swifts, and we'll get into that. But first, I have to do some measurements on the car. So because we're going lower, I picked up this two-way alignment kit just so I can realign the car when I'm done, but I also want to see just how much the lowering springs affects the geometry. So I'm going to take some camber measurements to see what they are stock, and then we'll take the measurements afterwards to see how much it changed. For the front passenger side, we're at about positive 0.3. So both sides are around positive 0.3. I've already done the rears, those are -2. So we have some positive in the front. We'll see how much that changes once we replace it with lowering springs. So let's get this car lifted up and get these wheels off.
To remove the OEM strut, there is 3 bolts holding the top hat into place. You'll need to unclip the ABS sensor and also unbolt the brake line.
So I've got the brake line and the ABS sensor out of the way. Now, this top bolt is the camber bolt, and there are some markings on it that can show where it goes and where it's at. So normally I just mark it with a Sharpie so I remember the position, but there's one notch that's specifically facing outwards toward the car, and there's like 5 notches on the top, so I know the position is 12 and 3. So when I pull this out and put it back in, I'll put it in the same spot and I'll be able to have the same camber measurements. Maybe this would be a lucky one too. No PB blaster necessary.
Lastly, there's 2 bolts on the bottom of the strut that connect it to the knuckle. Next up, I need to compress the spring with a spring compressor so that way when I untighten the top strut bolt, it doesn't shoot off. You do need a pass-through wrench to make sure that the strut doesn't spin in the shaft as you untighten the top nut.
What I like about these springs is they are designed to work on the OEM struts. Now, they're on the upper limits of the valving, but I don't plan on pushing them too hard or running them very long. If I was running them longer, I'd upgrade to a Bilstein B8, which is designed for lowering springs. A full set of those is going to run you around like $850, and with the springs, you're at $1,200, which is easily in the range of like those entry-level coilovers.
When you put the spring back on, make sure you align it to the bottom perch. And make sure the washer is flat side down, angle side up. I didn't need the spring compressor when I was reinstalling the spring, and then I tightened down that top strut bolt as hard as I could off the car.
One thing to note that the top strut bolt that needs to be torqued down to like 41 foot-pounds, I couldn't do it off the car because my torque wrench didn't have a pass-through. So I installed them on the car and basically I lowered it, and that allowed me to torque it to spec because the weight of the car stopped it from moving. The fronts are fully installed, and that's gonna bring me to reason number 1 on why I went with these Swift springs, and that's gonna be because how much they lower the car. Now the RCE Yellow should lower it about 3/4 of an inch, but the Swift gives me that 1 full inch that I was looking for. So with the OEM springs, the gap between the fender and the tire was definitely bigger than this. It's very noticeable on how much these lowering springs took down the car, but it's looking pretty good. Let's get on the rears.
To remove the rears, you're gonna have to move the liner out of the trunk a little bit so you can get access to the 2 top bolts. Then there's 2 bolts on the control arm, one for the sway bar end link and one for the shock swing arm.
Now that we got one of the rears out, this brings me to reason number 2 on why I went with the Swift springs. So into reason number 2 on why I went with these Spec-R springs is going to be the spring rate. So the fronts are 6.3 and the rears are stiffer at 7.4 compared to the RCE Yellows, which are equal all the way around, I believe at like 6.4. So because I'm not doing any other suspension mods, having a stiffer rear should give me a little bit more rotation in those tight corners. However, I do have some coilovers on the way, and we're gonna compare the differences of what coilovers feel like to lowering springs. And we have a couple other goodies, so we're gonna be dialing in that suspension. If you want to see those videos, be sure to hit that subscribe button down below.
Installing the rear springs is just like the front. You're going to align the bottom of the spring to the bottom perch and install everything in reverse order.
So unlike the fronts where the top rotates, this one doesn't rotate. So when you put it on, you wanna make sure it is aligned to the way that it goes in on the bottom of the control arm. We have got these springs installed. Now the real question, how do they drive?
I've been driving for about a week with the new springs, and to be honest, I didn't think there'd be a very noticeable difference in ride quality. I simply thought it would be a lower car and to feel a little bit more comfortable throughout the tight corners. But I was wrong. Under hard braking, there's much less nosedive, and under hard acceleration, there's minimal squatting and the car feels very planted. With the OEM springs exiting a corner on throttle, I could always feel the nose lift up a little bit, which felt unstable. Now it's much more confidence inspiring and I can push the car a little further. And the ride height compared to stock looks so much better. That 1 inch makes all the difference in the world. This is how the car should have came from the factory. But we're not done. There is one more detail when it comes to installing these lowering springs or lowering the car in general, and that would be the camber changes once you lower the car. Before I installed the springs, the rears were about -2 camber and now they're about -2.6, but the rears can't be adjusted until I get adjustable lower control arms. The fronts were previously 0.35 positive camber, and afterwards they were about -9. That change was very noticeable. It's not undrivable, but it does need an alignment.
And that brings us to the last question, which is who are these lowering springs for? And that's gonna be anyone looking for better handling at an affordable price. For a daily, it's not that uncomfortable. It's a little bit stiffer than the OEM springs and you will feel it on bumpy roads, but overall it's not that bad. Where you will notice it is when you're braking into those corners, you're gonna get less dive, and when you're accelerating out, you're gonna have less squatting, so you're gonna be able to enter that corner faster and exit faster, and it's gonna feel much better all around. But we're not done dialing in the suspension on the STi just yet. We know how great these lowering springs perform, but now it's time to test out some coilovers.